Alright, hello. Today we'll be making a non-WYJ fog map. If you don't know what a WYJ fog map is, it's the map making meta that has dominated fog mapping in Advanced Wars by Web for a long time now. It's basically extremely wide fronts and extremely open fronts, so that player tactics have the maximum amount of space to be expressed, and skill expression is the most important thing. And that's good, we like that, which is why that's been the meta for a long time. But sometimes we want some maps that are a little bit different. We want some maps that make a bit more use of heavy terrain, like mountains and pipes and sea, to create some interesting situations that you wouldn't get in WIJ fog. So here we'll be going through, I actually recorded this earlier, I'll commentate over the top of it, and we can see why I do things and my thinking at each stage. So here we go. Okay, fresh map. This one is a 20 by 20, and I'm just going to use that for now. I'm not going to change any of the dimensions. Let's just see how we go with this. I think 20 by 20 is actually a pretty good size for a 1v1 map. So let's see what we can do. When you do C tiles, here's a little aesthetic tip for you. Try to make them a bit inconsistent. See how it's kind of a rounded edge there? That looks nicer than straight edges all the way through. The same is true for river tiles. Try not to have really straight rivers. Try to make them a bit organic looking, have them be twisting and turning, sometimes inconsistently. It's a good way to make your map feel more natural, I suppose, organic looking. It definitely comes across. And see, even there I do a little bit of extra twist on the edge of the map, even though that doesn't really matter, just to give it that little bit of extra organic flow. It is just aesthetic. But it does matter. That kind of stuff adds up. So I'm going to sort out the bases. I want some infantry reinforced across the rivers, but obviously I'll need a bridge of some kind to get vehicles out. And you'll notice there I didn't align the bases perfectly. I think bases in a straight line look a little bit inorganic. A lot of map making for me is about organic shapes. So just a little bit of misalignment in the bases I think actually goes a long way for the map. And here I'm adding some shoals to give mechs and infantry a bit of a extra boost, although mechs don't really need it. Just to make sure that infantry don't get bogged down crossing the river at the double corner there. So we need a way for vehicles to get out. But I also want a mid-game option to speed up vehicles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a seam here, and then I'm going to put some forests around the bridge. So the natural route across the bridge is slow, but you can break the seam to speed up your reinforcements. This is a good way to give players some choice. Do you break the seam? Do you just put up with slow reinforcements if it means you get extra tempo by not building artillery? That kind of thing. You want the players to be asking these questions. So this is an attempt at a non-WYJ fog map. Normally I would say don't have mountains anywhere near the middle because they give incredible amounts of vision. Here I'm going to break that rule. In fact, this map I'm going to break a lot of rules, including having vision over contested areas. Normally WYJ maps are very open, very flat ground, no heavy terrain, no mountains. And this leads to tactical options because players can move their vehicles wherever they want, which can lead to them having more options in where they place their army. But sometimes it's fun to try and make a fog map that breaks the mold a bit. We'll see how we do. So, as always, you don't break every rule, and one of the rules that you want is to have the center to be not high value terrain. You want weak terrain in the center, so if someone chooses to sit their army right in the middle like that, they can easily be war broken. But again, I'm going to break some rules by putting some heavy forests around the center. The extra mountain vision will be counteracted by the fact that there are tiles that mountains can't reveal in forests. Again, this is breaking a lot of rules. This might not work. We'll see how we go. Normally you would never have forests that close together because artillery and just general wall breaking becomes very, very difficult if you have to get vision of tiles before attacking them in sequence like that. So I'm going to put the airport here, which is a bit away from the bases, a bit kind of cut off. But if I put it far enough back, it can contribute without being too strong. Like, you can't just make a copter and immediately interrupt a city kind of thing. Going to put some extra mountains here, try and make a bit of a two-lane situation where the strong side, where the bridge is, has to choose between going to the edge of the map or going towards the center of the map. We'll develop that a bit more later. Okay, I think I was cooking a little bit too hard here. I set out to break the rules, so I thought maybe some dense cities in the middle, but I think I quickly realized that this is too important. With that many cities in the middle, you send all your units there, you win the middle, you probably win the map. So it's a bit too strong. So you'll see me here trying to weaken that a bit by not having such valuable properties in such close proximity to the middle. So here I'm trying to weaken the attack. Because the strong side is going across that bridge, there'll be more vehicles coming that way. So I put roads on the side that the strong side is going to be coming from, so the weak side has a chance of holding that city on stronger terrain than the attackers. And I put a lot of silos, 2 sets of silos in the middle. Means I'll probably end up putting 2 comm towers per player, otherwise silos can become a bit oppressive. That extra firepower is necessary, well, not necessary, but important if you want silos to be manageable for large armies. And again, I'm just making sure that a tank sitting on that back city can't easily interrupt a center city from a safe position. So I'm blocking it off with forests. I mean, it still can, but now it has to sit on plains to do it. So here I'm thinking, how do I strengthen the 2-lane dynamic I was mentioning earlier? I don't want any more mountains. I think what we've got is enough. But I think if I fully block it off with a pipe seam, then it'll become a dynamic lane where one player will be stronger early, then perhaps the pipe seam breaks and the other player can come in and take some properties, and it'll kind of swing back and forth depending on the stage of the game. It's good to try and give your map kind of a changing board state, and pipe seams are a good way to do that, a good way to add some dynamic change of rules halfway through the game. I think I put that there so that mechs coming out of that base would have a nice tile to sit on after the shoal. But you know, tanks could also sit there if they're threatening that lane. It's still a solid place to sit as a tank. You notice I put a lot of weak terrain on that pivot point. So if the tank sits near that bridge, and where the shoals are, near the sea tiles, near the pipe seam, to choose which way it has to go, it has to sit on weak terrain to do that. Which means if an indecisive player leaves their whole army there, potentially they can get hit. It's probably a bit deep, but it's good to have places where you think players will sit their army to be weak terrain. And here I'm making sure that you can't just easily swap lanes. Using forests to slow down lane swaps is a good way to force vehicles to commit to a lane. So here I'm just counting some tiles. I'll do proper tank measurements a bit later on, but sometimes it's useful just to do a quick little count just to kind of get a basic idea of where tanks will end up, because that's where you know the front lines will be. So I actually decide that the weak side is too weak, so I'm going to create an extra option to have a quick reinforce to the weak side. I think later on I just end up making that completely open, and I think it strengthens the map by giving players more options about where to send units. But again, I want to slow it down a little bit. If that corner comm tower is to be contested at all, and it probably isn't, I'll probably change it. I need that back route to be a bit slower than full speed. I know some people complain about an overuse of forests to slow down reinforcement routes, but it really is a good way to kind of tweak reinforcement routes in a more micro way without doing massive changes to the map. It lets you kind of curate exactly how fast tanks go, and it is kind of a necessary evil for map makers, I think. So this is me attempting to create a back route. I think I iterate upon this a few times. And I think here I mess with my first idea for strengthening the weak side is to make the bridge be more central, to allow units to kind of choose which way they want to go initially. But I think I end up going back to how it was, because it forces you to commit tanks from their first move, not their second move, which I think is even better. You want players to have to commit early and make choices without information, or based on where the state of the game will be in 2 or 3 or 4 turns time. And that's how I think you make the strongest fog maps, because that rewards forward thinking more than reactivity. So here I've created a faster route, but I'm still slowing it down with the forest. I think I end up changing this later. Sometimes you just gotta think. I'm just thinking, what am I gonna do? It's tough. It's tough out here. So here I go. Here I just said, you don't need a pipe seam. Let's just make that back route completely open. That way players can commit tanks towards their weak side from turn 1. And that just simplifies everything. Now I can revert this bridge area back to how it was, and have full commitment for each base from the tank's first move, or the vehicle's first move. I still want the extra pipe seam to give players a way to speed up reinforcements if they choose, but I imagine that back base will now probably go towards the HQ almost always, unless it's building infantry. So the pipe seam is a little bit less important than it was. Here you can see I try some roads on the edge, but it just looks bad. Too much grey near the edges of the map. It brings your map down visually. I'm very aware of that, so I just immediately undo it. Normally I don't like these 2x2 mountain formations, but here I think it looks kind of cool and gives the map a bit more of a consistent circle. More importantly, I put this forest here, so if that middle base wants to reinforce towards the HQ, it now has a very awkward move where it has to undermove by 2, or it has to sit on its own base, which obviously you're not going to do. So now that middle base reinforcing towards the HQ directly is so slow that it's not worth doing. This means if someone does make a play for the HQ, the defending player will have a very hard time reactively defending it, which is good because that means the attacking player has a chance of actually taking the HQ. I play with the tower position here. The current thinking in the map committee is that contested towers in Fog aren't that great. They kind of favour Olaf and mass damage and brawly play, which can be a bit centralising. So I think perhaps I'll start using safe comm towers. Even when I have 2 per player, they'll both be safe, or at least they'll be mostly safe. I like the idea that the second comm tower can be taken in advanced board states, but for now we'll just have it safe. So here I'm just using the map analyzer extension to get a rough idea of where the front lines are going to be. So you can do tank turns. So it looks a little bit messy there, and you can see that some of the contested properties don't fall clean. Like that looks good at 2 turns, but 3 turns looks quite messy. So I think I'll do a little bit of tweaking to try and clean this up. I do like how the 3rd turn tank can overtake those contested properties, and likewise the 3rd turn for the blue tanks can also overtake some contested properties. That means there'll probably be some more dynamic 3rd tank move trades. Still, I don't like how in the center you can sit a tank cleanly on the city, and I don't like how on the edges those 2 tanks overlap there. I think I'll try and fix that. Ideally, you want tanks to not be kissing and not be standing on top of each other, because that means there's a high likelihood that it'll just brawl or stall. So how can I slow it down? Well, I could just put a bit of heavy terrain here. I don't like this though, because this will make defending the HQ potentially too easy. So instead I'm going to use a C tile, I believe. Yep. That way the tank doesn't have a clean move to try and reinforce the weak side. And of course make it look a little bit better with some shoals. It's also good to have weak terrain on the defensive side of the HQ. That way, if you are trying to defend your HQ, you have to do it from weak terrain. So a desperate struggle for the HQ can, it's in the attacker's favor, hopefully. Now I'm counting out the tank moves to see if it is slowed down sufficiently. And then from the attacker base we'll do the same thing. How can we slow it down slightly? I opt to put a second forest there. We'll see if that works. I also tried to play around with making more decisions, forcing you to move your tanks even more, divide your tank's attention even earlier. Given that this is the safe area, like right in front of the bases, it's okay if it's choky because it's not a contested area. You're not actually going to fight there. But still, I think I loosen it up a bit later. And here I play around with using some sea tiles and river tiles in close proximity, which is very naughty. Don't do this. You want players to be able to tell easily if it's a river or a sea, and having them next to each other like that just makes it confusing at a glance. So I just undo it immediately. So let's have a look at the tank moves now. Unfortunately, it still sits cleanly on the middle cities, but you can see the sides look a lot better. The tanks don't overlap as evenly. It might actually stall looking at this. See how on the edge the two neutral cities are closer to one side or the other? It's important not to do that, so I think I'll address that later on. Oh yeah, and here you see me weaken this again. It was too tightly constrained with all those river tiles. So here I let you, I don't force you to commit your tanks quite to the same extent. So I like how that's contested. I like how the third move for both players overcomes that city. The middle is a little bit, it's not ideal actually. Oh, and here I'm just testing the infantry, and you can see that sits cleanly. It's okay if infantry sits cleanly if they're going to be fighting vehicles. So here I'm testing what happens when the pipe seam breaks. So I'm simulating a tank move from the base after the seam's broken. And you'll see I'll measure that against a non-broken seam player and see what kind of advantage you get from that. So I'm just going to move up by 1. Okay, so now this is fair. So now you can see when you break the seam, you get a huge advantage for these contested properties, which is great. And yeah, you envelop all of these contested properties once the seam breaks. So that looks good. That's exactly what I want. Let's decorate the sides a bit. I play around with this. I don't want it to be too choky, and I don't want artillery to be too strong on the side here. Given it's quite choky, it's only 3 tiles wide, I don't want it to be too easy for artillery to just stall it out. However, on the back near the bases here, there's no problems. You can put mountains, you can put interesting visual things to kind of make it look a bit nicer. I think that's something people overlook. Making your map look nice actually makes a big difference, I think, to how people interpret it. If it looks really good, people are more likely to think it's a cool map. I'm considering where to place another forest. It's not too strong, and I end up just not placing another forest. And I go through to see if any of the other themes look nice. As usual, the default theme kind of just looks better, so I'm just going to leave it on that. Now the very important part, probably the most important part of the entire map, what player colors to use. As an original genius, I of course go straight for orange, the generic player one. It's a classic. I also play around with having a pre-owned airport. I like the idea, and obviously make the HQ a lab to make sure the income works. But I like the idea of a starting airport because it lets you get some T-copters out really early, which can make the cap phase more interesting. And a bit of a blocker to prevent rushes, cheesy rushes. I put it on 2 HP because I think 10 HP is actually too strong of a blocker for late game. You want people to actually be able to break it when the time comes. I elect to make those 2 bases pre-owned. I think in the final version of the map I actually make the base closer to the airport pre-owned, just so there's a more even cap phase. As it is here, you can see the contested sides will actually be dominated by early infantry from that river base, the one on the edge. So that's not ideal. And of course, I love my missiles. Great vision. They don't actually really fight anything that matters, especially early game. They're quite squishy, so there's some interesting tactics you can do about where to put them. You can even try and swap them to mid, and maybe even get a lucky copter snipe if your opponent isn't ready. So there's some cool things you can do with it. Here I add a few more roads to the middle in case a recon wants to front switch. But I decided it's a little bit too much grey, so I think I take either one or both of these out. No, I just take both of them out. Visuals over gameplay every time. Make no apologies. Alright, let's take one last look. So the 2-turn looks great. You can see how every property that matters is between the 2 turns. The 3 turns looks pretty good. You can see there's some contested properties on the sides, neutral properties. In the middle, some properties that both sides have overcome. I don't love the city sit in the middle, but I think it's a necessary evil. I'm not too worried about it. The middle will either be hotly contested or it won't matter. Either way. Doing some copter checks. Again, it's fog. Copters are generally pretty weak in fog. I'm not too concerned. And here I'm just going to check the income. I think it works. I'll have a bit of a look at this later, but at first glance it looks good. So there you have it. That looks like a pretty functional map to me. Of course, there'll probably be some silly FTA. There'll be some nonsense. I'll probably tweak it later. I'll leave the link to the map in the description. You can check it out and see if I have in fact made edits. I almost guarantee I will have. In fact, here I go right now. What am I doing? Oh, changing the comm tower location. I think that's too contested. If it's in the middle like that, then the middle becomes too valuable again. So I think I'm going to immediately undo this. Yep. My idea with this comm tower is to have it to be pseudo-contested. Like, it generally is owned by one player, but if one player is winning, they can kind of push and take the other person's comm tower reasonably. That's the goal. So I end up putting it there. Again, that's pretty deep. If you can push to that, you've probably already won. But I think that's good. I think it's a nice little kind of win condition. If you're strong enough to get there, you get a boost in firepower, and which you can probably use to finish the game, in theory. So it's currently on 18k per player, which is fine. I think that's actually a pretty nice number. I prefer a little bit higher, just so you can get some tech units out. So I think I'll add a city somewhere. Let's see. Anywhere from 16 to about 24 I think is fine for standard. 24 would be on the very high end and 16 would be on the very low end, but in that range is fine. Don't overthink it too much. So now it's on 19k per player. I put it next to the airport. Because the airport's pre-owned, that's not actually a chain, so I think it's fine. So there you have it. That is a full map run. If you've watched all the way, thank you. Please feel free to find something wrong with it and comment something negative on my map. It's always fun. Please do it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. I don't know if I'm going to do another one of these. It's been fun. We'll see how we go. Thanks. Bye.